Napoleon, one of history's most notorious conquerors, invades Egypt and accidentally creates the world's greatest archaeologist. This is the incredible story of how the Rosetta Stone unlocked the secrets of ancient Egypt. In the summer of 1798, thousands of French troops are fighting their way through the Egyptian desert. A single soldier stumbles across a black slab hidden within the remains of a large statue. Unbeknownst to him, he has just uncovered one of humanity's most important archaeological finds. Our story begins in 1799 in the town of Rashid, modern-day Rosetta. The year before, Napoleon had launched his ill-fated campaign into Egypt. His army was vastly superior to the Egyptian forces and quickly began overrunning the country. However, resistance soon stiffened. And in July 1798, Napoleon found himself pinned down in the siege of the coastal town of Alexandria. With him were his top military officers, including General Monod, who we will meet later. But also within the city was another notable resident, and a known French soldier named Pierre-François Bouchard. Over the next 3 months, Napoleon's men slowly began to take control of Egypt. In September, they finally captured Alexandria, and the following month they occupied Cairo. Yet despite these victories, Napoleon was becoming increasingly disillusioned with his invasion. There were constant rebellions to put down and supplies from France were not arriving as expected. He desperately wanted to end the conflict and return home. Meanwhile, in England, there were those who wanted to see Napoleon defeated. As war with revolutionary France gripped Europe, Britain sent out a naval squadron under the command of Sir Sidney Smith to blockade the Egyptian coast. Smith would eventually capture the strategically important port of Alexandria. And there, while exploring the town, he would encounter some locals who told him about something incredible. They spoke of a stone tablet covered in strange markings, which they believed could be the key to unlocking the lost language of ancient Egypt. Smith would head straight to the town's museum where he would discover an ancient stele inscribed with what appears to be 3 versions of the same text, one written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, another in Demotic script, and a third in ancient Greek. It was exactly as the locals had described. In the meantime, Napoleon and his officers were preparing to leave Egypt. On the evening of August 12, 1799, they gathered together for a celebratory dinner at the house of General Monod in Cairo. In attendance were some of the most brilliant military minds of the time, including Generals Kleber, Monod, Jacques MacDonald, and Jean Lannes. They had all come together to try and bring Egypt under French control, but their efforts had largely been in vain. After 4 years of bitter fighting, they were finally ready to go home. As they dined, Napoleon and his officers grew increasingly agitated by news coming from France. If the reports were accurate, then it meant that the French Revolution had taken another bloody turn and the Directory was no more. Instead, a new government had seized power and they were eager to end Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. It didn't matter that Napoleon and his men had spent years conquering Egypt. In the eyes of the new regime, the invasion had become a costly distraction. They demanded that Napoleon and his officers return to France immediately. Just as they finished their meal, a messenger arrived with the official word. Napoleon's Egyptian adventure was over. He and his officers prepared to leave the next morning. But first, Napoleon wanted to visit the town's Antiquities Museum. While there, he came across the newly acquired Rosetta Stone and knew that it contained the key to the lost language of ancient Egypt. But he wasn't interested in Egyptology. He only saw the stone as a possible diplomatic tool that he could use to ingratiate himself with the new regime in France. Before leaving, he handed the stone over to his secretary, General Monod, with instructions that it should be shipped back to France along with other treasures. The general complied and placed the stone aboard a ship bound for France. Yet Napoleon had unwittingly set in motion a series of events that would change the course of human history. Meanwhile, as the ship carrying the Rosetta Stone left port, British forces were beginning to close in on Alexandria. In 1799, the British Navy was commanded by Lord Horatio Nelson, one of the Royal Navy's most legendary figures. By this point in his career, Nelson was already famous for his stunning victory against the Spanish and French fleets at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, but he was yet to achieve his greatest victory. In 1801, Nelson sailed his fleet into the Egyptian port of Alexandria, beginning the British occupation of Egypt. Over the next 2 years, Nelson would spend much of his time exploring the region. During one such expedition, he and his officers would stumble upon the ruins of an ancient temple. One officer, Captain Thomas Legg, noticed a stone tablet embedded in the wall. At first glance, it appeared to be covered in meaningless scratches, but when Legg took a closer look, he realized that they were actually ancient hieroglyphs. Excited, he called over his companions and together they made copies of the inscriptions. They had no idea what the text said, but they knew that it was written in the same script as the Rosetta Stone. On returning to England, Legg presented his findings to the Royal Asiatic Society, who in turn dispatched an expedition to find more inscribed stones. It proved to be a fruitful endeavor as dozens of slabs were discovered and brought back to England. These discoveries included the infamous stone known as the Rosetta Stone. At the time, it was thought that this particular stone had been recovered from a shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. However, this is not true. In reality, it was stolen by a British soldier named William Hallowell from the ship that was transporting it to France. Back in Egypt, meanwhile, the British were taking an increasing interest in uncovering the secrets of ancient Egypt. In 1802, they founded the Egyptian Exploration Fund, whose members would raise money to support the work of archaeologists in the region. One man in particular was eager to get to work, Thomas Young, who many believe was the first modern Egyptologist. While the French were ultimately unsuccessful in their attempts to decipher the Rosetta Stone, the British would have better luck. Yet even they wouldn't have succeeded without the aid of a brilliant mathematician and polymath named Thomas Young. Young was born in 1773 in the village of Hamden in Great Ayton. From an early age, Young displayed an exceptional aptitude for learning. As a teenager, he taught himself Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin. He also mastered several scientific disciplines, including astronomy, physics, and chemistry. Young went on to attend St. John's College, Cambridge, where he graduated top of his class. After graduation, he studied medicine and became one of the first physicians to accurately describe the pathology of diabetes. But Young was not just a brilliant scholar and doctor, he was also a gifted linguist. And it was his linguistic skills that would prove invaluable to the British effort to decipher the Rosetta Stone. In 1814, the British government asked Young to examine the recently acquired Rosetta Stone. At the time, nobody had been able to read any of the text on the stone, but Young noticed something interesting. The text on the left was written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, while the right-hand side was written in a language that he recognized, Demotic script. Young was confident that he could read Demotic, so he set about translating it. After examining the stone for a few weeks, Young produced his initial findings. He announced that the text proclaimed the divinity of Ptolemy V, who ruled Egypt from 205 to 200 BC. He also declared that the name Cleopatra was mentioned, as was the general Ptolemy, who he believed to be the pharaoh's right-hand man. Young's initial translation was impressive, but it wasn't enough to unlock the hieroglyphs. He was missing one key piece of information, a native Egyptian speaker to help him translate. Meanwhile, back in France, Napoleon was trying to make sense of his own failed Egyptian campaign. Despite being forced to leave Egypt, Napoleon never gave up his dream of controlling the region. As the years passed, he rose rapidly through the ranks of the French military, eventually seizing power in a coup d'état. He went on to establish the French consulate and later the First French Empire. Throughout this period, Napoleon continued to plan his return to Egypt. He even secretly invaded the country in 1803, only to be repelled by the British. His final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 led to his exile on the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. There he died 5 years later, his dreams of empire forever extinguished. Throughout his exile, Napoleon kept a close eye on developments in Egypt. He learned of the British acquisition of the Rosetta Stone, but he was unaware of the progress they were making in deciphering it. Had he known, he may have been heartened to know that his own officers were playing a part in the British effort. After leaving Egypt, General Manu took up a position in the French army in Constantinople. Through his contacts in the Ottoman Empire, he learned of a Syrian merchant named Ahmad Kamel who claimed to be able to read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Munoz alerted the British, who dispatched agents to question Kamel. Unfortunately for the British, Kamel was unable to translate any texts. But he did direct them to a Coptic monk named Sylvestre de Sacy, who lived deep in the Egyptian desert. It turned out that Sacy was the key to cracking the Rosetta Stone. Working with a team of British scholars, Sacy was able to read numerous ancient texts, including the Rosetta Stone. Together, they published their findings in 1822, which revealed that the stone proclaimed Ptolemy V's decree about land ownership. While this was not as glamorous as Young's earlier translations, it was still an important step forward. Unfortunately for Sacy, his contribution to Egyptology was largely forgotten. This was partly because he chose to remain anonymous out of fear of persecution from the Egyptian authorities. It was only after his death that his name was added to the annals of history. In 1822, the year that the first translation of the Rosetta Stone was published, Thomas Young died. He suffered a stroke while attending a lecture by renowned scientist Michael Faraday. When Young passed away, he was working on a number of important projects, including a theory of universal grammar. None of these projects were ever finished as Young was laid to rest in an unmarked grave in the churchyard of St. George's Chapel in Heston. It wasn't until 1922 that Howard Carter uncovered the tomb of the boy King Tutankhamun. This monumental discovery marked the beginning of a golden age in Egyptology. Over the next few decades, archaeologists uncovered countless artifacts, including Queen Nefertiti's bust and the intact tomb of Ramesses III. Thanks for watching.